Hey, welcome to week 5 of the Mr. Lewis Weekly Update. We have a great...
Ayo, straight from his home in Baltimore, Maryland. It ain't quite live, but it's right on time. It's the Mr. Lewis Weekly Update with your host, Mr. Lewis.
Get it, just go to the big board.
You'll see everything. You'll see the big board.
That is precisely the idea, General.
Here we are once more at the big board. I want to remind all my students about classes on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Please come to class. Don't leave me like this. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'd love to sit around and play guitar all day, but I miss your faces and I miss interacting with you. And we can talk about all the content and questions you need to know to do better in the class. That brings us to our first segment of the day. Cue it up, Jelani.
Bringing you some good news for a better mood. Here's a little bit of happiness.
Our first little bit of happiness, once again, comes from Baltimore. Now, people are allowed to leave their homes to go on a walk around the neighborhood, to walk their dog, to get some fresh air. It's good for the soul, it's good for the mind. What some people here in Baltimore have been doing is putting positive messages in chalk on the sidewalks and the streets to promote that positive thinking and just make a feel of collectiveness. Check it out. It's you and me. All this time to ourselves really gives you an appreciation for the mundane. You know, we're not allowed to leave, we're not allowed to go places, and we start to watch what's around us and see the beauty that's always been there in front of us. But at the same time, we got to make a joke about it. So, what's better than doing a play-by-play of nothing?
It's not even that warm today, just standing, letting all the unpleasantness soak in. And this might well have shaken Olive, wondering now if she needs to go back and roll in that very poorly squirrel in the trees, which got her shouted at a few moments ago. But she might have to try something, because Mabel is piling on the pressure here, doing nothing at all, and that's the beauty of it. Come on, out you get! There we are, no recognition, no recall whatsoever. A stare that says, I'm doing what I want, and I have zero respect for you. I think there might be a move by Olive, a response to this effort by the youngster. Yes, there it is, joining a rival again. Absolutely no purpose to it, not fetching anything, just wandering round. Synchronised spin, a nice touch. Now both of them wondering how to finish this off.
Last little bit of happiness is a throwback to one of the most hilarious comedy groups of all time, Monty Python. In their TV show, Mighty Python's Flying Circus, they had a skit called The Ministry of Silly Walks. All over the United States and in the UK, a new trend has started to take place. Now let's do a comparison to Mighty Python. So, next time you're out walking the dog or just taking a stroll around the block, do a silly walk. Make it fun. Kind of like this kitty cat. You've probably noticed that we have been having multiple different professionals from a wide range of careers come out and talk to you about their jobs, what they're doing right now during the crisis, and how they're, maintaining. This week's no different. I have a very special buddy coming out to do our segment. But first, let's have Jelani cue it up.
To keep you abreast of what's relevant, let's get to poppin' fresh with professionals.
Hello, Mr. Lewis. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here on this segment. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. My name is Sean Coyne. I am a UMBC graduate with a degree in computer engineering, and I am the owner of Vitruvian Labs, LLC. Vitruvian Labs is a software development company handling programming projects for the Department of Defense. So, what do myself and my fellow developers do at Vitruvian Labs for the Department of Defense? Well, I can't tell you that. Sorry. Just kidding. So, I work in a research and development lab for the Army focused on tactical radio communications. So think of the handheld radios that the soldiers use to talk into that you see on movies or anything like that. We work on those radios. Those radios can also send data. So think of them as little directly connected Wi-Fi routers. So I've been lucky enough in this lab to be exposed to a lot of different programming fields, programming topics, and programming paradigms. So I've done things like write Android apps. The soldiers use Android phones out in the field to complete their missions. I've written some apps for them. I've done iPhone apps. I've made little sensors, designed the circuit board, wrote the code that was loaded onto those sensors. Those sensors then go out into the field. They do GPS tracking or environment tracking and send that data back to a central hub. I've made web pages. Use those web pages to visualize data and let us know how well or not well something's working. I've done some work with some self-driving cars. The Department of Transportation came to our test track to test out their cars, test how well they were communicating between the cars. I wrote the software to collect that data and visualize it, so that was pretty neat. So yeah, I've just been exposed to a ton of different things. There's something out there for anyone interested in computer programming. It's not just a one-size-fits-all type of thing. A ton of different things you can do out there. So if you're interested in getting into computer programming or seeing what's out there, it is a great time. The hobbyist field has a ton of low-cost or free solutions to play around with and learn some programming languages. Some great programming languages to pick up are Python. That's an easy one, that very powerful, very easy to learn. Maybe you want to make web pages, so you got to learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, that sort of thing. So I have some things here that I use at work and at home on my programming projects that you could probably use too to get started. These are all very low-cost solutions with great tutorials on the internet, and you can do some really neat things with them. I have one here, it's called an Arduino. The company is Arduino, and all their devices are called Arduinos. These are microcontrollers. They hook right up to your computer with a USB cable. And what you do with these is you would put them into a breadboard here, plugs in, and then you would hook in sensors, maybe an LED light, a distance sensor, GPS, anything. There's a ton of sensors out there. And you would write your code and be able to control that sensor and read data off of it. Here's another Arduino, just a lot bigger. It can do more, but same concept. Here is one with a Wi-Fi chip on it. So say you want to get into the Internet of Things or connected devices. These things are really cool, really easy to use. And like I said, all these things are super low cost, probably under 30 bucks. Here's a really cool device that we use all the time. This is called a Raspberry Pi. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of this. These are really neat. They're about $30, and this is a full computer. It has USB for keyboard and mouse, HDMI port, it has Wi-Fi, so you can hook this up to your computer, monitor and keyboard, and you have a computer here that you can do your programming projects on. You can also hook up sensors to this thing, GPS, lights, distance sensors, and do just a ton of stuff. They have a great website, raspberrypi.org, with all their tutorials and projects other people do that you can look at and get ideas for. And there's some really cool sites out there that sell kits, so you don't have to go out and buy all the different wires and sensors separately. They'll send you a kit, and you can just get started. Sites like sparkfun.com make really great tutorials, really great products. Adafruit.com makes great tutorials, great products. People post their projects there. That's really cool. One project I did with the Arduino was my wife kept bumping the trash cans in the garage when she would pull her car in. She would get too close, bump the trash cans. So what I did is I took an Arduino and then I hooked that up to a distance sensor. So when she would start pulling into the garage, the distance sensor would detect the car and feed that data into the Arduino. And then I had this LED light strip I got from Adafruit, and this would light up red, work its way down to yellow and green. So then she would know she was in the garage and could stop. So that was a good project. That was really fun to do, and it saved my trash cans. So it's a win-win. So yeah, there's a ton of material out there, a ton of low-cost options to get started on. Just some really neat stuff. So that's all I have for today. Thanks again for having me, Mr. Lewis. This is a really cool thing you're doing. You have a great production team. Hey, Jelani. Hey, Britt. Thanks again for having me. If anyone has any questions, Mr. Lewis has my contact info. I'd be happy to chat or share some more info with anyone. That'd be no problem at all. So thanks again for having me. That's all I have for today. Have a great day.
Sean, I have a special surprise for you.
Yo, what up, Sean?
Hey, Sean.
So to help you cope with this social distancing and the work you have to get done at home, we have a new segment this week.
Here's a minute of mindfulness with the chef.
So I'm going to let Mr. Scheffenacker take over now and talk to you about a special mindfulness tactic you can use at home.
Today's strategy is called the Pomodoro method. Pomodoro, for those Italians in the room, me. Pomodoro means tomato. In this method, this guy, Francesco Cirillo, invented this idea of the Pomodoro method based on his timer, which looked like a tomato. I'm going to send a link for you in a second, but what the Pomodoro method is where you spend 25 minutes on doing your work and then 5 minutes off doing anything else. First technique though, make sure that you have your phone off. Do not turn your phone on and start scrolling through Facebook, YouTube, or whatever during that 5 minutes. It's very strict. You gotta be strict on it. So timer goes off, 25 minutes. All right, I got 5 minutes to do whatever the heck I want.
Situation, I can't go Carlos Santana and play my guitar, taught by Mr. George Lewis, who's my hero. Run in place, which is really awesome, or my favorite one, squats. So here we go, you're gonna get a great view. So 1, 2, 3, look, jumping squats, 4, 5.
Why do I want to do that? Because I'm sitting on my desk and at my chair all day long. My brain, my mental health needs to improve. We're all stuck inside our houses at a constant basis. Anybody can do air squats for 5 minutes. Anybody can do push-ups for 5 minutes.
Nope, not gonna happen.
Anybody can run in place, walk, go refill your water. All of that stuff takes no time at all. And why do I want to do and be active? Because I need to give my brain a break. My brain needs a break. These are some of the things that you need to do. So I'm coming up on my 5 minutes, give or take. When you feel like you're ready to go back, as long as it's right around 5 minutes, you get straight back to work. You go start working on whatever it is. There's a lot of work that you guys have to do. Pomodoro method, tomato method, whatever you want to call it. Francesco Cirillo, my Italian dude. Have a good one, guys.
Thanks, Chef. Well, we're about halfway through the show. You can guess it. I need more coffee. So let's go to a...
Nothing like a look back at what used to be, so here's a flashback to this day in history.
This Day in History, May 3rd, 1898, is presented by Professor George Derek Musgrove from UMBC. He is a historian of post-World War II United States history with an emphasis on African American politics.
My name is George Derek Musgrove. I'm an associate professor of history at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I'll be speaking today about Septima Clark. Septima Clark was born May 3rd, 1898 in Charleston, South Carolina. Her father had been born into slavery on a plantation not too far from the city. Her mother was born free at the tail end of the Civil War in the city itself. And Septima Clark went to segregated schools. Schools across the South were segregated at the turn of the century. And she eventually makes it to Avery Normal School in the early 19-teens. We have to remember that at this time, not only are schools segregated, black and white students are kept apart, but the black schools have a far less funding, far fewer teachers, and far fewer resources than the white schools. And so to give you a specific example of how that played out in Septima Clark's life, South Carolina did not provide a high school for black students in the Charleston area at the time that Septima Clark was ready to go to high school. So after she finished the 8th grade, she went to Avery Normal School, which was technically a college, but it taught high school style classes. So she's still a teen and she's in Avery Normal School, learning how to become a teacher. When she's finished her training at Avery Normal School, she heads out to Johns Island. If you can look at a map, you'll see that South Carolina has all these little tiny islands along its coast on the Atlantic Ocean. Those are called the Sea Islands, and the largest one was Johns Island, where there were large numbers of African Americans who used to live and work on the plantations there. Septima Clark taught those people. She taught children during the day, which was her regular job, and then at night, basically as a volunteer, she taught adults who also wanted to learn how to read and write. And she pioneered an approach to teaching during these night class sessions that she would use for the rest of her life. These adults would come in wanting to learn how to read and write, and she would use everyday forms that people typically fill out to try and teach them the 3 R's. And so, for instance, she'd use like a Sears catalog and filling that out. And everyone used the Sears catalog back then. It was kind of like the Amazon of the early 20th century. And you could buy anything from a piano to clothes to shoes in the Sears catalog. And so she'd work with people to try to fill out those forms. In the process, she'd help them to read and write. She heads back to Charleston, where she becomes a teacher in the city's public school system right at the end of the 19-teens. And she would remain there all the way through the 1950s, teaching in the schools. While she was there, she got very involved with the NAACP, and that really pushed her into an activist career. She focused on trying to equalize resources between black and white schools, specifically making sure that black and white teachers were paid the same amount. They absolutely weren't during the time that she was a teacher. And as a backlash against civil rights activists like Septima Clark, in 1956, the South Carolina legislature passed a law that essentially said that no state workers could be members of the NAACP. And at that point, she was the vice president of the Charleston chapter of the NAACP. So she knew this law was unconstitutional, so she refused on principle to resign from the NAACP so she could keep her job. And she was promptly fired. And not only was she fired, but she also couldn't find a replacement job anywhere in the state. She was essentially blacklisted. So she decides at this point to become a full-time activist. She gets hired by the Highlander Folk Center, which is a labor and civil rights training organization situated in the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. And there she creates a model for training people how to read and write, mostly poor sharecroppers, by using the same types of forms that she had used when she was teaching adults on Johns Island. But this time she adds a little twist. Not only are people filling out the Sears catalog to learn how to read and write, but they're also filling out things like a voter registration form. And that's because she's training people not simply how to read and write, but also how to become active citizens through these programs that she's creating at Highlander. Very quickly, people in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was the organization founded and led by Martin Luther King Jr., come to discover her work, and they try to spread it across the entire South. And so they actually hire her in the late 1950s, and they begin spreading what she and they call citizenship schools across the South. And so teachers like Septima Clark, or teachers trained by Septima Clark, would head into rural counties where a lot of people who had lived around these really bad school systems that were operating across the South. She'd work with those people, or her teachers will work with those people, teach them how to read and write, and then teach them that one of the things that they had to do now that they know how to read and write is head down to the courthouse and fill out their voter registration form, so they could get people in office who would actually put money into the black schools so they wouldn't need an outside organization to teach them these things in the first place. She does this all throughout the civil rights movement, and you can make the case that by the late 1960s, she and her teachers had touched literally hundreds of thousands of African Americans, improving their literacy, their reading and their writing skills, and also encouraging them to become active citizens and civil rights activists. She writes all of this amazing story up in 2 autobiographies, which I encourage any of you who want to know more about her to check out. In 1962, she writes a book called Echo in My Soul, which is her first autobiography. And in 1986, just 1 year before she passes away, she writes Ready from Within, her second autobiography. She died as a much celebrated godmother of the civil rights movement in 1987.
So let's check out this week's open letter.
But first, let's see what's in the box.
What's in the box?
It's
ice cream!
We don't actually know who invented ice cream. There are many different countries around the world that have done their take or version of ice cream, whether they are actually using a whipped cream that is cooled and chilled, or by mixing it with snow and ice from mountain and glacier regions. We do know, however, that the first documented ice cream source is from the 2nd century BC. And we also know that Alexander the Great himself loved and ate ice cream, along with many of the Caesars of the Roman Empire. The ice cream that I am partaking in is from Taharka Brothers here in Baltimore. Guess what? They deliver. Best day. Taharka Brothers is a local business here in Baltimore. It's also one of the few locally owned Black businesses in the city. Now, Taharka Brothers is not only about promoting delicious ice cream for your taste buds, they're also about promoting social change and equality for African Americans within the city, within the state, and within the country. Dear ice cream, not only are you delicious and a great treat to beat the heat, you also are a great platform for social change in our democracy. So with that, so that's it for our show this week, guys. I want to thank all my guests for coming out this week. I also want to thank the Taharka Brothers for making delicious ice cream and delivering it to my door. Don't forget to wash your hands and be like Mr. Andre here. Wait. Let's bring that back. I knew it, Mr. Andre. I told you were a model. You're pulling off the blue steel like Derek Zoolander perfectly. That's it, guys. Stay safe, stay smart, stay stellar, and I'll see you next week.
Yeah!
You see them moles, they are dancing on their own, like at those bones. They are parading down the road. Look at those bones, they are dancing on their own. You see them moles, they are parading down the road. Let me paint you a picture of some spooky thing. That voodoo man,
Test. Gonna test the microphone. Yeah.
That's all, kid.